Well, we are not able to get Mr. Oyedele now. We hope to get him maybe next week, hopefully. But at least we're able to get a member of the committee who's joining us this morning, Mr. Michael Ango. Mr. Michael Ango is partner and head tax advisory and regulatory services with Anderson, Nigeria. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Ango, good morning, and thank you so much for taking time off your very busy schedule to join us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I mean, yesterday when I was at that meeting with Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, and well, it's like you guys had a whole lot of meeting from the results you're sharing, at least from the draft of the reforms, the policy reforms. You had to do research to down decades, look at the laws and all of that. And I think at the end of the day, I do have a copy here. At the end of the day, you said that you would like to, you captured your reforms as fair taxation, responsible borrowing, sustainable spending. That's a whole lot. And journalists who were in the room even yesterday were like, are you sure this is not another Orosanye report that will be referring to decades after this? Because implementation in Nigeria seems to be a very hard one.
All right, so thank you again for having me. Just to clarify first, before I answer your question, I am indeed a member of the committee, but I'm not here speaking in my capacity as a member, of course. I'm privy to some of the proposals or recommendations because, again, we took part in it. So yesterday's meeting in Lagos was essentially part of the engagement that the committee had set out to have with various interest groups. And what Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, who is the chairman of the committee, tried to do yesterday was basically to lay out some, not all of the proposals. Of course, there are some things that would always, attract the attention of the media and Nigerians at large. But suffice to say that the committee worked over the last 8-9 months through various committees. We had committees on fiscal management, fiscal competitiveness, economic growth. We had the tax policy review committee. We had the tax law reform committee. So a lot of work went into some of these proposals. And speaking to some of the things that were discussed yesterday, for example, the issues of constitutional amendments with respect to our various tax laws. It is no doubt that we have various taxes that are being collected in Nigeria, and some of them really of no or little utility, either to the government or to the people of Nigeria. And so one of the major things that the committee wants to achieve is to see how we can shrink the number of taxes that are being collected in this country to a manageable size, but not just that, to those which are actually providing value. And so when you hear things like VAT reforms in particular, rather than focus on, for example, saying that VAT rates will be increased, let us look at what the ultimate goal is, which is to shrink or reduce a number of these nuisance taxes, as the chairman himself referred to them, and then collapse them into one manageable tax. So, for example, if you have a VAT, which can accommodate some of these other things, and then you increase you rejig the sharing formula, and then give more of the VAT to the states, I think the states will understand that, look, the federal government is not trying to reduce your coverage in terms of what you can collect, but rather trying to create efficiency in the tax system. He also mentioned, issues around, for example, the telecoms saying they have 43 taxes. It's not just telecoms. You have manufacturing. A lot of sectors have been crying. So one of the issues which the committee has set out is, of course, a constitutional amendment that will address some of these issues. We've also looked at areas around harmonization of tax revenue not just tax, revenue administration in Nigeria. Today we have several agencies that collect different forms of revenue. So what we're hoping to do is to say, look, what is the ultimate goal of revenue administration in Nigeria? It is to collect the revenue. Who collects is not as important as what is collected. So if we can have a single agency or body which collects all of the revenue, accounts for it, and then puts it in the pool where it is then distributed, I think that would be a lot more efficient. Of course, there's so much that has been discussed, even in terms of, the review of the national tax policy. I was part of the tax policy review committee, and then we did a lot of work in terms of reviewing Nigeria's national tax policy, which was last reviewed in 2017, with focus on various aspects, including looking at the poor and vulnerable. You did mention something about the spending and expenditure framework. We tried to put out a policy for spending, for borrowing, and all. So there's been a lot of work, and I think no person can tell you all the work the committee has done in a 15, 20, 30, or even 3-hour meeting with journalists. But suffice to say that what the committee is trying to do and what the chairman has tried to do is to carry everyone along and to ensure that the general public, Nigerians, are aware of what we're doing and to follow through, because at the end of the day, the committee is not going to be able to implement its recommendations. What it will do is send them on to the president, to National Assembly, and then hope that the Nigerian people themselves understand what the committee wants to do and adopt these recommendations.
So, of course, it's all about harmonizing. And you did say yesterday about how to capture this over 60 taxes into about 8 harmonized. And then also dealing with the fact that an individual shouldn't pay any double-digit taxes. Could you explain more on how this is supposed to affect individuals in the country?
Okay, so what it is that if you take, for example, now the let's say a company's tax compliance. An average company in Nigeria will pay the big ones that you and I know, which is the company's income tax. They'll pay the tertiary education tax, of course, the VAT. If they dispose of any assets, they'll pay capital gains tax on those. And then if they're in specialized sectors, for example, telecoms, they'll pay the NIDA levy and all of that. Then you begin to go into sector-specific taxes. If you're in the telecom sector, you pay levies or fees to NCC, and then you have right of way. If you go to a particular state, they will tell you 101 things, base station fee. If you even want to move your diesel to the base stations, they will charge you for some stuff. So it's almost impossible for any business to function efficiently in such an environment. In fact, a story was told that if you start an average business in Nigeria today, before you have earned a naira, you would receive a tax notice either from the local government or from the state government in some instances. So the idea is to say, look, listen, taxation, like the president said, is aimed at taxing the fruits and not the tree. If nothing has been produced, then what do you want to tax? So rather than have all this large, humongous number of taxes, some of which indeed are not even collected by official authorities, I myself have had, incidences where, some persons wearing some local government uniform will stop my vehicle and say they are from XYZ local government and they want to check for advert or radio, TV licenses. And, I always say to them, look, what you're doing is even illegal. You cannot collect taxes on the road. The Taxes and Levies Approved List for Collection Act has stated that you cannot create a roadblock for the purpose of collecting of taxes. But the whole idea is really to just reform the Nigerian tax system. How does it sound that, I'm reporting to my shareholders and I say to them, last year I paid 63 taxes to XYZ. We want to ensure that Nigerian businesses focus on the core of what they want to do. If you're in the manufacturing sector, you focus on manufacturing. When you interact with government in a very stable and certain manner. So if you know that these are the 8 or 9 taxes that you are supposed to pay, you can account for them, you can budget for them. But let us not be fixated on what number we are able to arrive at. Let us understand the philosophy and the reasoning behind why we need to reduce these taxes. I think if we do that, then it will be easier then to say, okay, even if it is 1, 2, 3, whatever number we are ultimately able to arrive at, does it cater to the ultimate goal for which government wants to collect revenue, which is collect the revenue, appropriate it, and use it to provide social services to Nigerians, use it to provide roads, hospitals, provide security and all of that. That is the ultimate goal. There's no benefit to the government if we have 2,000 taxes in our books and all of these taxes contribute little or nothing to the government coffers.
And also there's the focus on a minimum or minimal tax burden, especially on those we call the informal sector.
Yes, so we've proposed an entire framework, for both the poor and vulnerable, and then we also have for the informal sector. So the informal sector is essentially, that sector which is largely outside the financial system. They don't have formal structures, the woman who sells on the street, the vulcanizer, even the guy who runs his keke business. So these are all persons who we term informal sector. The whole idea is to create a framework that caters to their own needs and also ultimately moves them into the formal sector. We need to help them to formalize their businesses, and then subsequently government can then say to them, you are running a business, you're making something, you also need to contribute your own quota to taxes. But that is not the start. The start is first to identify who they are, to kind of, give them some form of registration, and then create a presumptive tax regime, which has been in the pipeline for so many years. A presumptive tax regime sets a floor rather than a ceiling to say, okay, if you are in this business, this is what you should pay as your tax in the first instance. As you then begin to formalize, as you then have books of accounts, and there will be a lot of interaction and support from government. Government will carry out education, taxpayer education, even provide them some tools, cash registers and all of that, so that they are able to, put together some of their financial records. And then ultimately, they then can become formalized businesses. They know what they earn, they know their revenue, they know their expenditure, and they can then tell you, this is my profit, so I can pay a tax on my profit. If they are subject to income taxes, of course, we will try to make sure that the income tax rates are such that we have a progressive income tax regime in Nigeria, whereby the highest earners pay a higher percentage of their income, and then the lowest earners will pay a lower percentage of their income. Like I said, the work of the committee is all-encompassing. There's been a lot of effort into, catering for different segments of the economy. And, in particular, the poor and vulnerable, we've tried to set out a framework in the national tax policy that says that tax policies will be geared towards providing succor for the poor and vulnerable. Social welfare programs must be designed with them in mind. All of our spending, even borrowing, will be designed in such a way that the monies that government gets, whether by way of taxes or by way of borrowing, will ultimately be used to provide, for the poor and vulnerable in the society. So these are some of the issues that, we considered in the committee, and we've made our recommendations, and hopefully those recommendations will be adopted, by the president, and if possible, where legislation is required, this will go to the National Assembly, and where legislation isn't required, Mr. President will sign executive orders, and these things will begin to take effect as soon as those executive orders are signed.
Yeah, we're certainly looking forward to that, Mr. Ango. But as you noted, it's a whole lot. I mean, going through the proposal, it's a whole lot, such as constitution amendments and even spending and even politics, where you say that only an individual who is up to date on his tax should be able to run for an office. So we're going to have more, but we have to let you go, Mr. Ango, Mr. Michael Ango, now partner, head, tax advisory and regulatory services with Anderson, Nigeria.
Thank you very much.